Excuse me.
Good morning. We're here to help you think biblically about entertainment. How is that done? Well, we should do that for everything in our lives, especially for entertainment, because sometimes we relegate, as Christians, push off entertainment to say, well, I'm going to think of Christ for everything, but I'm going to kind of carve out this little corner onto the side and think just that's my part. I'm sure Jesus is going to forgive me for having this 2 hours there. That's not the case. Go ahead. It's not a matter of forgiveness for it, but you as a Christian, your whole life is going to be centered around Christ anyway. So you have this part for the entertainment. Go ahead and use that. Enjoy it. You're going to be talking about your kids. Let's say you go off to a movie and you watch this with your kids. You're going to be talking about it anyway with your kids afterwards, right? And some of those things be like, well, what would you do in that situation if you were there? How would you handle some of these moral dilemmas? Or they took a different aspect of reality in the science fiction. What would happen if the world was like that? How would we respond differently? Then you take that, and then you can also go to whatever, maybe your work environment or something like that somebody's talking about, these shows, and you can introduce concepts of the gospel to them as well. So that type of thinking is where we're headed with this. And we're going to look at all sorts of different aspects of entertainment, especially for us geeky guys. We're looking at science fiction and fantasy. So what shows or movies were there that we can take different aspects of them and use that as a springboard to talk about eternal matters? This morning, we're going to look at that for time travel. How to travel in time, how to be a time traveler and not kill your grandfather. That's today's message.
Oh, it seems like a pretty critical one if you want me time traveling.
That's right.
Don't kill yourself, kids.
It's a public service announcement for those who do it.
How not to murder yourself in 5 easy steps.
That's
or
right.
Erase yourself from history or whatever.
Yeah. So we set up a poll to find out who would what would be the different aspects of time travel that would really work. If you were to travel back in time, there are basically 3 different things that govern the nature of time and what would happen to timelines or history. And we put that out for you guys to see. What are the 3 different ones that, if you were to list those out?
Off the top of my head, 3 different types of time travel that we could, at least in science fiction, that we see. We often see either it's, already predestined. This can have a couple of different varieties. Either it's already locked in. That way you get like, try and think of, there's a story by The Light of the Moon by Dean Koontz.
Right.
So he does this where he's got a couple characters that time travel and they can see everything and they can touch, but if they press on anything or try to interact with anything, they just pass through it. It's basically like the entire thing is a hologram.
So that's a fixed timeline.
So that's a fixed way of thinking about it. Another way of doing a fixed sort of timeline where you can't change the past would be if you go back in time and no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you are always part of the time anyway. So if you go back and you try and, hypothetically saying that you're going to murder your grandpa, you go back in time to murder your grandpa and you get run over by a bus right as you're going to run up there, and your grandpa's still around. And yeah, you were the person that tried to murder your grandpa in that story that your grandpa always told you about, because that was the time that he was almost assassinated or almost killed by this crazy nut job. But you were always part of the history, always part of the timeline to begin with. Another one is sort of a dynamic, sort of shifting timeline where your changes override the other ones. That's what we saw in that clip from Back to the Future. Is he was being overwritten because his decisions in the past had made his parents never meet. Well, not never meet, but not get together.
Right.
So they end up just passing as ships in the night. And because of that, his family is erased from history. So you need to have that correction, and boom, he's gone. The problem is then you're left with the grandfather paradox, which if you weren't in existence, then how could you go back in time and make this alteration?
Okay, so the last one is multiverse, and I have different slides for that. So I want to show which ones these are. So this is the first one, fixed timeline. You go back, this is everything, doesn't matter. Whatever you do, you cannot change the past. That's number one. The second one is dynamic, and that is where you can change the past, but when then you end up with this grandfather paradox. If you go back in time, kill your grandfather, you never exist. If you'd never existed, then you wouldn't have gone back in time to kill your grandfather. And you get this causality loop going on here, and the universe blows up, or something bad happens with that. Marty McFly loses his hand and goes off into the nether regions, like Thanos has snapped him out of existence. And so then the last one is this multiverse type of approach, where you every time that you make a decision, you go back in time, you change just the smallest little thing, you actually create a branch, that another universe where that time has changed, and you have an original timeline that goes on in that direction.
Well, that's kind of, unfortunately, with Back to the Future, as much as I enjoy the movies, they weren't consistent with that.
No,
they weren't consistent on which one they did. They didn't do an overriding one throughout the entire. They switched at one point to the branching sort of multiverse timeline concept, where you have, Doc explain, well, it's split down here now. We're in this other timeline.
Right. Okay. So in Back to the Future 1, Marty disappears, just like we just saw.
Yes.
Right. And so that is this dynamic timeline that it ends up kind of causing problems, and he's the one who basically disappears. Right. You have this explosion that goes on. He never existed. Then you have the multiverse. I got you. The multiverse that's going on with this, and that is, you're throwing me off a loop. That is number. Yeah, that's in the
number 2. And then number 3 goes back to the whole overriding thing.
Okay, so see if you can bring up the poll here. We put out a poll to say which one you guys believe would be the best, what you believe would happen of these 3 different types of timelines or natures of time, which they would be. So we had fixed timeline, you can't kill your grandfather, things don't change. Dynamic timeline, and multiverse, and then others. So it seems like most people wanted this fixed timeline, or believe that was the case. So if you have so in my question for the responses here, were most people saying that the fixed timeline means that there is no time travel? Is that what people were thinking? Or they say that once you're done, that's it, you can't change the past period?
I think it probably is. It's always been. So you have the 2 different ones that I presented earlier on. Not that the time travel doesn't exist, because that should have been under the other section. And besides, if we're talking to a bunch of other nerds about this, then they should definitely not be too critical on the whole time travel thing.
Well, it also it was asking the question there too: if time travel were possible, what would govern causality loops? So you already go with the premise that time travel is possible here. You're already saying that, yeah, it is. And so I think most people's response for the past is the past. You can't change it. So with one of the questions I'm asking with this is in two ways. How do we look at entertainment biblically with this? Is there any way as a Christian you'd say, well, it's one or the other? Does the Bible even really specify? I mean, if we were to say that time travel were possible, would it be locked into one of these? You don't want to say something like if the Bible says there are no aliens and then we meet an alien species. Well, then you're kind of sunk, because the Bible doesn't say that, by the way. The Bible leaves that open as possibility. I'm not saying that time travel is possible. I don't believe it is, but this is, if you're going to write a story about this, which I've written a story about time travel. It's a science fiction series, and I've used a hybrid of one of these three. We'll talk about that later in another episode. But first of all, how would you respond in this as a Christian, given these different things? And then how could you use this as leverage to talk to people about it? So do you want to...
Real quick here, since he has joined, you want to take it?
Sure. This is from, how would you... Damyan Kuzmik?
Unfortunately, your guess is as good as mine. I am horrible with names. I've never claimed to be an expert in this field. So we apologize.
Okay,
if we utterly butchered your
saying
name.
Greeting, good morning to you too, as well. Is he giving the pronunciation?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
Which I don't think helps.
You want to try it?
Nope.
It's good. Well, for those of you who are looking, you can get the pronunciation there. I will study this name, so I'll be able to get it better in the future. So it rolls off for Tom.
But it is a pleasure to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning for some coffee and talking about time travel. So if we look at these, though, if you are sitting down to write a story, hypothetically speaking, as a Christian, and want to add one of these to it, one of these sort of timelines to it, I think you have to deal with, what do you do with Scripture? I think it's critical. Because if you've got like the fixed timeline, that's not an issue, because you can't ever change it. So the Bible is going to be preserved no matter what. So it's always going to be the same. If you've got a dynamic sort of timeline where you're overriding it, that gets a little more sticky, because what do you do with the Bible?
Yeah, let's say, all right, let's go ultimately here, just like the grandfather paradox. Let's talk about the Jesus paradox. You go back in time, and somehow, I don't think this would be possible, but could you prevent Jesus from being crucified?
You go back, you try to prevent Jesus from being crucified. So you have to deal with that. I mean, if you've got time travelers, no doubt if you got a bunch of Christian time travelers, they're definitely going to want to at least observe the entire thing from beginning to end. That's going to be like the most popular show ever. I mean, look at The Chosen. That's hypothetical.
Yeah.
So you would definitely have a huge group of Christians that want to go and want to watch, to observe what's going on, not necessarily interfere. But what if you do interfere? Is that
okay? So I want to take that first one with you. So in the backstory for my series, the novel series, when time travel was first invented, sometime hypothetically in the future, they sent observers into the past. It was just an observation thing. So like World War I, airplanes were used, new technology, just as observation decks. This is the same thing with going back in time. All we're doing is watching. We're not going to tinker with anything here. We're just going to observe what's happened. So you get these really good recordings of history, and then probably some history books have to be rewritten to say, you know what, we didn't realize this is actually what happened in the past. So you get these historians are the people who are governing the time, reverse time travel sequence. By the way, we're all traveling in time right now anyway, right? We're traveling forward in time, and you can travel forward in time at different rates. You can travel faster given relativity, or excuse me, slower. The faster you go, if you're in an accelerated frame of reference, time slows down for you. Accelerated frame of reference either being that you are accelerating in speed, or you're essentially accelerating with a stronger gravitational force. As we're on this planet, we have a gravitational field. We're within the gravity well of the Earth. Time slows down slightly for us as compared to someone who is in outer space. It's very slight. Is that gravity increases like around a singularity, like a black hole. Time really slows down near the event horizon. So we already know that going forward at different speeds is possible. It's the reverse time travel that's really the question, and that's where the whole causality loop happens. So when these things happen, if we were able to go back in time and take a look, you might have observers first, getting cataloged what's happened. Could you, let's say one of these recording devices accidentally falls out of the sky, some little kid discovers it, maybe it makes a difference in time, in history, maybe it doesn't. But if you were to go back in time and let's say not prevent Jesus from being crucified, but distract Paul on one of his activities, so he ends up never writing the first letter to the Corinthians, let's say, how would God allow that to happen?
So that is a huge thing for someone who is writing Christian science fiction, dealing with time travel to deal with. So do you have the multiverse concept then, where now you got split off? Now you have a Bible with everything that is in it, and then you have a Bible in another timeline without that section that Paul never wrote. How do you deal with that, with the preservation of Scripture being God-breathed, and still be able to explore all those aspects of time travel itself? I think your example of it is an excellent one in how to handle that. You want to give how you use a hybrid function of these in order to.
I don't know if I want to talk about that just yet, but okay. So because I want to kind of preserve, there's a fourth possible timeline dynamic, a way of governing causality loops that I really want to put off for another series, and we'll talk about that. But you might have these fixed points in time. And Doctor Who, that series, I believe he talks about fixed
timey-wimey. That would have been a good clip. I forgot about that one. Timey-wimey.
Yeah. So he talks about fixed points of time that were not able to be changed. And so that's one way that you can possibly handle that. I think that quite possibly in reality, all the past is fixed. There's nothing that you can do to go back. But if you do, in fiction, these are points where good questions can be asked. If you could change things, what would you change? And that's another question that you could possibly ask unbelievers, or maybe in your kids or other people that you work with and stuff. If you could go back in time, what would you change? What would be the one thing that you would want to adjust? Would it be something personal in your own life? Would it be something more universal? Of course, there's always the big thing of killing Hitler, going back in time and killing Hitler.
Would you kill baby Hitler or not?
Yeah.
My answer would still be no, because the poor child hasn't committed anything yet.
That right.
Minority Report source style.
Yeah, because I know he's going to, and therefore I can.
And that was a real one, definitely in that show, because it's like, okay, is it actually, because you're seeing parts of the future, is it actually fixed, or are these just glimpses of possible futures? And I think that's something that they have to deal with. And if we dive in deeper into that one later on, I think that's something we should pull out. Is the future fixed? Does our free will alter the future, or is it 100%?
So here's another good question. Here's another good point that you can it can be a springboard for conversation. The whole concept of free will. Are we locked into a script that was given from the beginning of time that we have no way of changing? And you could, from a purely materialistic standpoint, you can say that biologically we're locked into, we're pre-configured. We're just an automaton working out a preordained script. Or even from a theological standpoint, some people would say we are predestined to do X, Y, Z, and therefore you just play this out. You just, again, are playing out a script. at what point do we actually have free will? And if we don't have free will, are we responsible for our own actions? So these are all good questions that I think would be a springboard to ask other people. And these questions are too much to try to tackle just in this one video. Maybe we just need to set something aside where we just talk about free will and predestination, maybe all those kind of questions that are there. So
yeah. So these timelines that we're seeing here, even though a lot of it was question of past timelines, it's also a question of future timelines as well, because you could have the fixed, like we're talking about, fixed. You can't change it. It's always going to be that way. You have no option in it. Or you have a dynamic or multiverse concept. Actually, dynamic or multiverse would kind of look like the same if we're just naturally progressing through time anyway. Where our decisions have an effect on the future and it can change one way or the other. So, but talking about time travel, there's a couple of different ways of handling it, and there's a couple of great ways that have been done in the past. I want to show a couple of those real quick. Some of these are very classic. Very, very classic.
I haven't seen this, so I have no idea what you're talking about.
The years rolled by. Everything unfamiliar. Except the smile of my never-aging friend. But what was this? Weird sounds all around me. What could it be? My curiosity compelled me to stop.
So that was from the time machine.
The original time machine. Yeah. I want to do a comparison between the original, the old and the new.
That would be good.
Yeah.
I found that one to be interesting because you're seeing the progression, other than the fact this mannequin has not been switched out in all those years, which it's kind of hard to believe.
Don't worry about that.
But
hand waving.
It's interesting to see the progression of time and how they showed the change throughout history.
Cultural change.
And that's interesting to see because, again, if you're doing another aspect of this time travel, going back in time, is even say we speak English. Okay, if we go back in time and we're speaking English to people, then that's not necessarily the same English.
No. There's a couple. I want to throw some other videos down here in the comment section, but there's some really good videos about the progression of the English language. You had the great vowel shift. You had other things that are going on. You go back far enough, you're not going to be speaking the same language, even though it might be called English. Imagine reading Beowulf talking to the people back then.
You wouldn't be able to.
You couldn't communicate.
Be the same English.
Yeah.
It's very old English. English has developed so many different ways. There are some languages that were more or less locked for quite a bit of time period, but even those have developed.
Yeah.
Even though there might be individuals who claim they have never changed, the language has definitely changed. The more you study those sort of things, the more you come to that.
So conclusion. that clip with the original time machine, that was probably one of my favorite scenes in that movie, because when I watched that way back when I was a kid, that was pretty good special effects. The fast forward, the being able to see those. If you had a time machine, I hope you get to see what's going on outside. Now you can talk about the physics, red shifting, the light coming in. If it actually gets in, would it actually be able to see? No, you couldn't, because the light itself would not shift in like that. But it'd still be cool to see.
Yeah, see the progression. In fact,
the snail crawling across the floor, the candle wax going down.
It was disconcerting to see the sun arc in less than a minute. To see a snail race by. My flowers flinging wide their petals to embrace the new day. And the hours speeding across the face of my sundial. And the flowers closing their eyes for the night. It was wonderful. What if I went faster?
I did not know you were going to show that. That's so funny.
Nope,
It just comes
I had
up.
that.
Okay, so Yeah.
So you have that, which is fantastic. It's an interesting way of showing it as far as visual aid.
Right.
But then there's other ways to handle it as well, as we see in Back to the Future.
You spent 7 years on MacGyver?
Wrong one. These clips are too small.
I can't see that.
Which one was it? This one.
What's this? What's this? What did I tell you? 88 miles per hour!
Doc, you killed Einstein.
So that's an interesting one. And they don't really ever show what is. It looks instantaneous almost in that case, where
Right.
it's just boom, you're there.
Right.
So that's another way of handling time travel. Where is there actually time that you're just going faster,
Oh, you're talking about all the mechanics.
or yeah? So we've got that aspect.
how
of
would it appear? Well,
How would it appear? How would you show this? How would you explain
okay,
it?
so
in writing?
so I think another another episode to go through and explain and talk about the possible mechanics of time travel. But we're looking right now at the effects, basically the grandfather effect. How to go back in time and not kill your grandfather. Give him a bulletproof vest or something when you first meet him. Don't meet him at all, because any interaction you have with him may have changed the past significantly enough to alter. Maybe you're still born, but you're raised differently. You know, your grandfather, your father ends up having a different approach on life and things like that. So yeah, these are all good questions to ask, and ethical questions that come up with it too, that can again be used as a springboard for conversation. So we have these three dynamics. We have fixed, we have dynamic timeline, and we have multiverse. With the multiverse, you have the problem of spawning an entirely new universe.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about another you floating around. We're talking about another universe is spawned. Now, I do use that in my novels, but there's a real problem with this, and it's the conservation of energy. You by just moving your arm in a different direction, even on the subatomic level, if something goes a different direction or it has a different spin or something like that, that is different. And it may or may not have consequences with everything else around it. So does it propagate out in a certain way? Does it only Earth is changed in this multiverse, or is there other things that are changed? How far out does that go? So it's very unlikely, I think. I think that scenario is very unlikely. And then you have the other question is there's two yous. So are there two souls? Did you just create another spiritual being?
Are you responsible in the eternal matter? Is it considered two different souls, or is it one soul?
It would be.
Yeah, because you got, one could be a mass murder, one couldn't be. And you can't necessarily judge one based upon the other.
Right.
So, yeah, that ends up being an issue. At the same time, in those situations, you also have the opportunity or issue of having time loops and having that sort of issue like they dealt with in Star Trek.
8. Ace?
A queen. You're going to give me a queen. And you're going to get a 4. Deal, Data.
But no one has bet.
Ah, forget the bet, just deal. 10. 7. Queen.
9. Jack. 4.
Deuce. 6. This is highly improbable.
So then you got the aspect, just like in that one, of you're repeating the same day. You don't necessarily remember the last iteration of it, but are you responsible for your actions in the other one, no matter what, even though you haven't necessarily lived it? I mean, these are all very deep theological questions. Now, again,
okay, go ahead. Finish that thought, and then I'm going to jump in with something else.
So that aspect, but what if you remember, and then go off the rails and start doing crazy things like they did in Stargate, which we did review earlier, gave our aspects earlier. And if you want to check that out, it's on the channel. But you end up getting crazy things and just doing wacky stuff like this.
Colonel O'Neill, what the hell are you doing? In the middle of my backswing?
We already had this clip. As far as the language warning goes. Language! It's a question. Do I clip out the language or do I not clip out the language? That's
all right. Wait. Let me pull back. Okay. So this is where you get this both of those are examples of a looping. And that was probably my favorite Star Trek Next Generation episode. In this loop, there is nothing they bring forward to the next loop other than maybe some residual memories, and that's why they're going back with the card trick. I don't want to give any spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen that episode, but like I said, probably my favorite one. But that gets carried over, and this other one that was with in Stargate SG-1, where they have that loop going through. That was a really cool one because that was an aspect of, you realize that when you keep doing the same thing, having this Groundhog Day effect, and there's no consequences for it. That's why they just started playing golf there. But
because that then leads to the ethical dilemma. And I think you would be responsible for every action you do, even though there might not be any sort of outcome or any sort of residual issues from that. And you could look from a secular standpoint and say, no, according to secular logic, that wouldn't matter because there's no bad that's done for it. So even if you went on, hypothetically, a murder spree, if time just reset itself, it wouldn't matter from an atheist standpoint because there is no bad that actually happens. You're the only one that remembers.
Right.
But from a Christian standpoint, you would still be responsible spiritually for those actions. Again, it's a heart issue more than anything else. So if you were willing to do that and went and did that, even though there are no outcomes, even though everyone else forgot it, God, who is outside of time, will still remember.
Okay, that's the key right there. So these are ethical milestones that you could look at and say, okay, there's something eternal there. There's an eternal principle there. There's an eternal principle here that you can talk about. God is outside of time. So he's going to be an observer of you doing all this stuff anyway, and not just a casual observer. I mean, he's involved. He's very active in people's lives. So you still have to answer to him. And how does he govern all these different aspects of time travel and things like that? So these are other questions that can be asked too.
Oh, absolutely. This is definitely a much deeper topic that we can dive into and do multiple other spin-offs of this sort of topic.
You think we bit off too much in one shot?
Well, we can always revisit it. I mean, we can always revisit, what are what are the spiritual aspects of time travel in science fiction? What are the spiritual impacts?
What are the theoretical aspects of black holes and singularities?
So we do also have another Star Trek fan that we definitely will be doing some of the Star Treks. In fact, I think next week we should be touching on at least one of them.
I think so. I'd have to look at the schedule to see what's coming up. I don't remember offhand. We are going to be doing the original series, Star Trek, the original series. As well as
so get ready to see a lot.
Next Generation. I don't know if we need to season by season or fan favorite shows. Like, I'd love to just do this one that we had the clip of. I forget the name of it, but yeah, there's some really good season. And then comparing the current versions of Star Trek that are coming out to the older ones, the more classical ones. How do they fit up, and where are they going ethically? Where are they, again, conversation pieces that you can have with the other geek friends around the world, of which there are 3 that you have conversations with. Okay, what else you got here?
So I think that's about it. I just want to let you guys know what we are doing in the future.
Yeah.
What's coming up. Let us know what you guys would find interesting as far as from a theological and spiritual perspective. I think there's a lot we can pull out from here, trying to apply, what would a Christian do? What would a Christian be responsible? For example, in the Stargate episode that we referred to, I mean, a Christian would be responsible for each iteration. So no matter what, you have to think of that from the spiritual side.
Even if nobody sees what you're doing or has a record or knows exactly what's going on, someone else does. And so there's a fun part to that. So again, thinking biblically about entertainment, specifically about science fiction and fantasy, there's so much material now that we have that we can use as springboards for discussion. We're going to try to hit on each of these topics going forward. Monday, we're going to be looking at the movie Looper and give a review. That's going
to be an interesting one, because that's definitely a more, I'd say, adult oriented show.
I believe it's rated R. We're wanting to keep things more PG-13 max rating, but there's times we're going to have to delve into that, especially if we're going to be talking about more current shows too. Looper came out in 2012, so that's a little bit dated. But a lot of this retro stuff people are still watching, especially if you're like binging on some of the streaming platforms. A lot of this stuff's still material.
I go back to it. I just watched not too long ago with my wife. I've watched the entire Star Trek series, one after the other, and Stargate series. We did that one. So I just pulled up all those, because these are classics that we really don't have a modern version of that we can sit down and watch without feeling guilty about, because we're being bombarded by some sort of agenda,
woke philosophy or whatever. So yeah, and I'm kind of laughing on the side because talking about the classics, the classics, and I'm thinking,
hey,
was that like last week for me? It's like, it's not
my fault. It's like, I remember before the time of Star Trek.
Yeah.
In the black and white era.
The abuse never ends. It just continues.
And continue with next time?
Yes.
See you guys Monday.
All right.
To stop this day from happening again.
You realize this is a little difficult for me to accept.
Hey, if it was just me, I'd agree. But what about Teal'c? Come on, is this the face of a crazy man? Bad example.